Hello everyone, I welcome you all to Ansarkari, and today in this video we'll be going to discuss 28th of December's newspaper. So we'll be going through two newspapers, The Hindu and the Financial Express. So as we know that nasal vaccine has been approved and it is going to cost rupees 800 in the private centers and rupees 325 in the government facilities. So it is called the Incovac, which will be rolled out as a booster dose for those aged 18 and above. And this is going to be the world's first intranasal vaccine against the novel coronavirus. Then coming to the editorial page, here we'll be talking about migration and also in the context of international migration. So we celebrate December 18 as the International Migrants Day, and we need to look at this at the celebrations or at basically International Migrants Day in the backdrop of unprecedented volatility that began in 2020 because of COVID-19. And there were events such as other events that have impacted we can say the movement of migrants is Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, worsening poverty in the sub-Saharan region, and also climate change. So all these resulting in large-scale migration. So these are the factors which have impacted migrants. And talking about the data on migration, so according to the International Organization of Migration's World Migration Report 2022, there were 281 million international migrants globally in 2020, with nearly two-thirds being labor migrants. So that is, we have also talked about the share, and in the larger pool of migrants, South Asia's share is nearly 40%. Further, the South Asia Gulf Migratory Corridor is the world's largest migrant corridor. So South Asia's Persian Gulf Corridor, here we're talking about, and you need to find out its location. Also, you need to spot basically the possible, we can say, sea routes that could have been taken by the migrants in this route. And migration is not uniform across the world, and it is shaped by economic, geographic, demographic, and other factors, resulting in the distinct migration patterns. So there are several factors which affects migration patterns, and there were basically the cases of around 300 Indian engineers from Tamil Nadu who were trafficked to Myanmar to work for a crypto scam, and nearly 20 Indian nurses were also trafficked to United Arab Emirates for fake job offers. So all these events, they're happening in the backdrop of people losing their jobs, and in the urge to find jobs, they undertake such decisions. And obviously, later, they come to know that they have been trafficked, and unfortunately, despite India being the largest migrant sending and remittance receiving country, the welfare of the Indian migrants abroad is hardly a priority for the government and the policymakers. So, India is also yet to have a tangible and a comprehensive migration policy when we talk about the national policy to ensure decent living and safe movement of the migrants. And India manages or governs. Currently, we talk about basically which law is in operation when we talk about safeguarding the interest of the migrants. So right now we have the Immigration Act of 1983. So we are still using an act which was implemented back in 1983, and it is yet to be updated. There are no changes made in this act, although we see that the migration pattern, they have seen sea changes. And so 9 million Indian migrants, they are working in the Gulf countries, and COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the existing exploitative nature of the kafala system. So it is a sponsorship system that regulates the relationship between employers and the migrant workers, which is basically it operates in the Gulf countries, and which has invariably resulted in the mass retrenchment of the labor force. So this is the kafala system. You should be knowing about it. And the reckoning problems that migrant laborers, they have to face, it includes irregular payments, poor working conditions, negation of labor rights, absence of a proper grievance redressal mechanism, and access to a transparent judicial system. So these are, we can say, the challenges that are faced by migrants. And we also need to focus upon the women workers also. So attention needs to be focused on the women migrant workforce, largely that are limited to the Gulf countries and also to the Organization for Economic Cooperation in Development countries to some extent also. So Indian nurses and caregivers, if we look at that they're working in which all countries. So we come to find that they've been working in the most volatile countries in the world, which includes Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, and Israel, and even in remote Papua New Guinea. So women workers, they venture to these countries using the services of recruiting agencies on account of major domestic problems. So that is the reason why they're migrating to such volatile countries. And government should comprehensively assess the situation of migrant women and create women-centric, right-based policies. So Government of India has to revisit its policies in the post-pandemic migratory scenario when we have seen sea changes in the migratory patterns, and needs to engage all the stakeholders and by passing the Immigration Bill 2021, which is still pending. Talking about India's G20 presidency and the focus on Africa. So, India, through a G20 presidency, it intends to be remembered as the voice of the global south, at the heart of which lies Africa. So, most of the 54 countries that are there in the African subcontinent, they are either developing or they are least developed countries. So, talking about India-Africa relationship. So India's equity in Africa is older and richer than that of China and US. But that should not be a source of complacency. And in the past 2 decades, we see to strengthen its political and economic relationship with Africa at the continental, regional, and bilateral levels. Several steps have been taken by India, and a special momentum in arranging high level exchanges and forging cooperation initiatives during the 2015 to 19 period have also been initiated. So, the G20 presidency is India's opportunity to ensure that the African Union becomes a permanent member of G20 grouping and reflect firmly Africa's Agenda 2063 for development. And India and the US, they should also work closer together when it comes to Africa's development. And finally, the fourth India Africa Forum Summit should be held in early 2024. Then we see that government debt, it rises in September quarter, and public debt, it accounts for 89% of the total gross liabilities in September end 2022. So you should just have a rough idea about the percentage share. And we have discussed in detail about cervical cancers and the human papilloma virus. So we'll just quickly go through this article. So here we see that cervical cancer is caused by infection with the human papilloma virus, and India accounts for 21% of the cases and 23% of the deaths occurring in the world because of cervical cancer. And to tackle this, the government has announced the rollout of vaccines for girls aged between 9 and 14 years through schools, and the girls who do not attend schools, they'll be given the vaccines by the community outreach and mobile health teams. So the indigenous human papilloma virus vaccine, which is called the Servavac, it has been cleared by the DGCI, that is the, we can say, the controller of, we can say, pharmaceuticals, and is likely to be rolled out by mid 2023. So it will be issued through the Universal Immunization Program, which is India's one of the largest public health programs, which offers free vaccines for at least 12 diseases. So cervical cancer, no doubt it is preventable and curable if it is detected early and it is managed effectively. And it is the second most common cancer in women in India. Then we have discussed about the CAG audit report regarding the Assam's NRC in yesterday's newspaper. Talking about Agra and Mughals, so here there are certain facts, so that becomes important, and obviously you should be knowing them from the perspective of history. So Babur's victory over the Lodi king Ibrahim Lodi was there. It was witnessed in the first battle of Panipat, which occurred in 1526. So Babur, he won over, you can say, the Lodi king Ibrahim Lodi, and that's how we can say that was a beginning of the Mughal dynasty in India. And talking about who wrote Akbar's biography, so it was Abul Fazl. And incidentally, we saw that Babur was not a Mughal; he was a Turk, and the dynasty he founded was that of the Timurids. So when we talk about the roots of the Mughal dynasty, so it lies there. And the name Mughal, it was misleading, but it stuck to the family and it came to include the Turks and the Mongols. So Rajputs, they had also built a fort called Badalgarh, and in 1504, Sikandar Lodi, he had stored his treasure here, and he even transferred the capital from Delhi to Agra. So soon enough, Agra itself was to become a treasure. So here we are talking about how different dynasties, and they basically they gave importance to Agra, and with Agra as his capital, basically here we're talking about now the reign of Akbar. So he made Agra as his capital during his reign, and he ruled for almost 50 years, and he also built Ibadat Khana in the neighboring Fatehpur Sikri in 1575 besides the fort in Agra. So Ibadat Khana, it was a bid to end the conflicts among the rival religions by creating a middle ground. So people from different religions, they used to gather in Ibadat Khana and have their discussions. So it had space for scholars of all faiths, and with all the glory and wisdom of the Mughals, Agra remained the second capital of India from 1504 to 1658. And Abul Fazl, he called Agra as Darul Khilafat and Delhi as Darul Sultanate. So, besides the great Mughals, even Afghans and the Lodhis, they also ruled from Agra. Talking about today's times, so Mughals, they are long consigned to history, but Agra lives on, now a bustling city known for its leather craftsmen, and the Taj Mahal continues to be the nation's pride. Talking about delimitation exercise that is going to be conducted by Election Commission of India in Assam. So we'll be basically Election Commission of India will be using the figures of 2001 census, and then and this would be carried out under Section 8A of the Representation of Peoples Act 1950. And as mandated under Article 170 of the Constitution, the census figures of 2001 shall be used for readjustment of the parliamentary and the assembly constituencies in the states, and reservation of seats for SC and ST will be provided as per the Article 330 and 332 of the Constitution of India. So you can just Google these articles once to have a clear understanding. And the last delimitation of the constituencies in Assam, it was done based on the census figures of 1971 by the then Delimitation Commission in 1976. So if you want to know what do we mean by delimitation exercise, so basically it is we can say a readjustment kind of an exercise where the constituencies of the state assembly and the Lok Sabha constituencies, they are readjusted on the basis of the changes that have occurred in the population of that particular state. And also when we talk about when it is conducted at pan India level, so we take into the consideration the changes in the population at pan India level. So that is basically to, we can say, to carry out elections in a much easier and fair manner. So for that purpose, we have the delimitation exercise. Then again, parliamentary panel, it pulls up the government for failure to create tourism council. So the House committee, it also asked what steps were taken by the government on the recommendation of including tourism on the concurrent list. So merely drafting a national tourism policy obviously is not enough for the development of the tourism sector. We need to work more upon it. We need to ensure it is effectively implemented. And the parliamentary standing committee has suggested fast tracking the creation of the National Tourism Council also, and also basically that will be making recommendations to the union and the state governments on similar lines as the GST Council does today. So observing that vision without action is a daydream, and action without a vision is a nightmare. So you can use this even in your, say, any means answer or an essay writing. So this is there. We are seeing that things are not being implemented effectively. They are working slowly. Then Russia has decided to ban the oil exports to nations with price cap from February 2023. And obviously, this is going to increase the prices of crude oil, we can say, for the countries who've imposed this price cap of $60 a barrel on Russia, so as to ensure that Russia does not earn a huge amount of profits. And this is obviously this decision of imposing a price cap on Russia comes in the backdrop of Russia-Ukraine war. And United Nations says that United Nations, it says to Afghanistan, that is Taliban regime currently there, to end all the bans on women, because it says that no country can develop socially and economically with half its population excluded. And obviously, living in 21st century, we see that women have to suffer so much in such countries. Talking about economy, the business page, we see the bank balance sheets. They see double-digit growth in this financial year after 7-year gap. And the credit growth also hits 10-year high in the first half of the current financial year. And this has been observed in RBI's report on trends and progress of banking in India 2021-22. And we also see a decline in the gross and non-performing assets. So these, we can say, are the findings of this report. And now we see that Indian economy has exhibited signs of a gradual strengthening of growth momentum, drawing from macroeconomic fundamentals amid an uncertain global environment. And the gross non-performing assets of the scheduled commercial banks, it has been declining sequentially from its peak that was there in 2017-18, and it has reached now 5.8% by March 2022. So that is there. I'll be going through more in the Financial Express. And talking about the merchandise exports, so they may shrink 2.3% this year. We see that sectors with high export intensity, they will specifically be hit hard by the ensuing global slowdown. Obviously, we can say that our export sector is going to be under threat, and we expect that we are expecting a slowdown in our exports, obviously because of the global slowdown. And the sectors which are there is gems and jewelry, ceramic, glassware, leather and leather products, drugs and pharmaceuticals, engineering and electrical goods, and textiles is the most export intensive sectors in the manufacturing when we talk about India. And obviously, if there is any slowdown in our exports, that is definitely going to have implications for the overall employment scenario for the people who are employed in these sectors. Talking about green hydrogen, so government is planning a $2 billion incentive program for the green hydrogen industry, obviously to promote it to move towards a less carbon economy. And hydrogen, it can be used as a fuel. So it is made by splitting water with an electrical process, which is called electrolysis. So water is split into hydrogen and oxygen. So if the devices that do that, basically they are called electrolyzers, and they are powered by renewable energy. So the product is called green hydrogen, and it is a fuel which is free of greenhouse emissions. So that's why we are encouraging more usage and more investment in this area. So let's take up the Financial Express now. So in Financial Express, as we were just discussing about the RBI's report, so it also says that banks' future is tense given the geopolitical situation, which is a cause of concern. So going forward, the banks, they may face a highly uncertain outlook, according to the RBI's Trend and Progress of Banking in India reports. The main concerns are the global headwinds that are brewing on account of the continuing geopolitical tensions, tighter monetary and liquidity conditions across the world, then potential adverse spillover effects on the profitability and the asset quality. So these are, we can say, are certain concerns when you talk about the profits of the banks and their performance in the future. And other concerns includes wider adoption of technology in the financial system amid a new wave of innovations, and climate change risks. They also pose new challenges for the financial and fiscal stability. So when we look at this graph, firstly, this graph is showing the trend of declining GNPA, that is the gross non-performing assets. So the blue one is for the public sector banks, and again it is declining for the scheduled commercial banks, for the private banks, and for the foreign banks. So it is, we can say, on a declining trend. And talking about the rupee trade, so rupee trade has finally started. First deal has happened with Russia. So settlement of the foreign trade in rupee has finally taken off, with a few transactions involving Russian firms having taken place recently. So we have also discussed in previous videos about Vostro accounts. So they are in relation to basically using rupee instead of dollar when we talk about trade transactions with foreign countries. So at least a dozen and a half offshore accounts they have been opened so far to facilitate the rupee trade with Russia, Sri Lanka, and Mauritius. So that is, we can say, a positive news for us, and that is not going to hamper. We can say it is somehow it will aid our trade also. Then we'll be talking about the sustainable external debt of India. So India's external debt position, it remains sustainable given the global uncertainties. And talking about our short-term debt, so that as a percentage of its total reserve, it stands at 17.5%. And when you compare it with other countries, it is 36.8% for China and 50% for South Africa. Similarly, when we talk about our external debt stocks as a percentage of the gross national income, that is 21.4%. And again, it is, we basically, India is in a comfortable position when we compare it with other economies, and this is 51% for South Africa. So this indicates that India's external vulnerabilities, they are within its comfort zone. And similarly, this data has been depicted in the graph. You can just have a look at this. Then talking about the performance of rupee. So we know that rupee is depreciated by 11.5% in 2022. And we believe that its worst performance has been over, and this was its worst yearly decline since 2013, and rupee is now expected to make a recovery in 2023. So a relative weakness in the dollar index, expectations of smaller rate hikes from the Fed, and optimistic domestic market sentiments, they are a positive for Indian rupee and Indian currency. So these factors, if they move ahead as expected, so that is going to aid, we can say, Indian rupee's performance. However, one challenge exists, that is surge in the crude oil prices. So that can limit the gain in the rupee value. And also continued investment into India will also rule out too much rupee depreciation. So a question can be asked in prelims examinations. They can write down these factors and ask you which all would be helping in appreciating the Indian rupee. So that's there. And looking at this graph, you see that earlier the Indian rupee versus dollar value, it was $1 was equal to 74.34 rupees, and now it has depreciated down to 82.85 rupees. So that is, we can say, the Indian rupee has become weakened, and obviously it leads to our imports becoming more expensive. And looking at the dollar index, so a weak dollar index is basically in the support of a strengthened Indian rupee. So the more the dollar index weakens, the better it is for the Indian rupee. And you can see the blue line, so it is fallen down, so it is showing that the dollar index is falling. So that's all for today. Thank you for joining in, Sarkari. I hope you have learned all the things that I tried to explain to you guys, and you can find the PDF link in the description box. Thank you so much.